My name is Sandra. I publish as S.G. Wong. Just quickly about me so you don't think I'm a complete clown, although, I mean, that's fine if you do. I publish and write hardboiled detective stories, novels and short stories. I have Ghosts and Magic, and they're set in an alternate history, 1930s era, Chinese Los Angeles. I have some wonderful panelists with me today for your listening pleasure and edification. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because they're going to do a fabulous job of that, probably a better job than I would. So, Tracy, please.
Hi, I'm Tracy Cooper-Posey. Apparently this is being recorded, oh joy. I write romance generally. I'm currently a full-time indie author. I have 95 books out. 36 of those novels are historical romances, but in actual fact, pretty much everything that you write, no matter what the genre, you need to do research. So learning how to get on top of research is a really good idea.
Next is Barb Galler Smith. That was Tracy Cooper-Posey. I just want to get my names in the right order. Thank you, Tracy.
Hello, I'm Barb Galler Smith. I write, I edit. I'm an editor with On Spec magazine, and I have a historical fiction trilogy. I'm a former, and do a lot of research as a teacher, and a former scientist, and a former librarian.
Oh, yeah, you might know something about research.
So I know a little bit.
Thank you. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Compton. I am the author of the crime thriller Amongst the Killing, and I have a sequel coming out in September called We the Moral Majority. I also run a network called Go Indie Now, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Cool. Michael.
I'm Michael Skeet. I actually grew up about a 10-minute bike ride from this hotel, but I've lived in Toronto for the last 30-plus years. I started writing in the mid-1980s. I actually sold the first short story I ever wrote to the second volume in the Tesseract series. And since they're now up in the 20s, that'll give you some idea of how long ago that was. My first novel, A Poisoned Prayer, was published last year. Follow-up, A Tangled Weave, will be coming out next year. There are copies of this, by the way, at the On Spec table for sale. And I've published in On Spec, in Asimov's, in I think half a dozen of the Tesseract's anthologies, and in anthologies in science fiction, fantasy, dark fantasy, and horror. A couple of my stories have been reprinted in year's best anthologies. So, yeah, I've been doing this for a long time.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're just going to ignore all the laughter next door, right?
We'll
Create our own.
We're very, very grateful that you came to see us, so thank you. So I'll just jump right in. In terms of research, I'm sure that we all have different methods, but do you prefer research first, or you come up with the story first? Why not? When has that worked? When has that not worked? Who'd like to go first? Joe, you look intent.
All right. Well, I believe in writing the story first and then doing the research. If you're anything like me, you can go down a rabbit hole really quickly, and then you get lost, and then the writing gets lost, and you lose all the momentum that you had. So I believe that if you write it all out, you can always go back and change it and fix it.
Yeah. Barb.
Well, I have a lot to say about that. The answer is yes. And in fact, sometimes if you're just looking at things and researching just because you're interested in it, it will generate a lot of ideas and stories, and then you carry on. Sometimes, and Sandra made me do this, so I'm going to tell you. She wanted me to write a scene with a particular character. So I'm writing out just a little bit of what the character is like, and I ended up with 3 questions. Talked to Jane Barnard about fashions at that particular age, and then when was the Irish famine, potato famine, and what was going on with that, and is there such a thing as black Irish, black hair and blue eyes, and they come from. So, and then I managed to write like longhand, 2.5 pages. So the answer is yeah. Why? Because whatever, the door is wide open.
But you started with your idea for the story in this case. right? And that research questions came up for you.
True. But in the anthology, I had 5 years of research. I had no story involved, and then just put it all together with the research first.
Okay.
So
you've done both.
Both.
Yeah, and they've worked for you both ways. Depends on the story.
Depends on the story.
Okay, Tracy, you're grabbing at that mic. You've
I
got lots to say.
I was just making sure it was in front of Barb. That was all. Actually, I do it both ways as well, but for different reasons. Because I'm doing genre fiction and I live off my writing, I have to make sure that it sells. So I tend to, as an indie author, write in series. So as an example, the current series that I'm doing, which is Victorian England, I've been researching it for years and years and years. I know it very well. So I'm constantly reading books that are either source material or about that era, which gives me all the background. Then I write the stories, and then I go off and research specifics that come up when I'm writing the stories. And quite often for that stuff, I cheat and use Wikipedia. But that's good for fact checking. So you don't slow the story down when you're writing. Just put triple X's or something like that, or guess, and then go and check your facts later. And so I do both.
Yeah. Michael, what would you like to add?
I also do two different kinds of research, basically. I start with a general overview of the period or of the subject that I'm investigating, because while a lot of my writing is historical or alternate historical, some of the projects are science fictional, but they still involve subjects that require more information than I happen to have at the back of my brain. So I start out with a general understanding of either the period or the subject. One of the tricks that I've picked up is to write an author's note. You'll often find these in the back of books. So I will write an author's note before I actually write the book that discusses either the subject or the period that I'm writing about. And if I've written more than 2,000 words by the time I stop, then I've done too much in terms of general research. After that, I start building characters, and then I do research that's much more specific to the characters. And we'll probably get to this subject later on, but a common problem for me anyway is using too much information in the story. And the solution to that, which was provided by a group of beta readers on one of my projects, was to ask myself, does this information matter directly to the character in the scene at that time? If the answer is yes, by God, yes, then I have to cut it out. Because otherwise I end up with more information than anybody but me cares about, and it slows down the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we will get to over-research. We all love that. So I just want to make a point, too, that this panel isn't about writing historical fiction, right? It's just about research. And even if you write a contemporary story, there are going to be subjects that we won't know anything about, and you still have to research them. So I just want to reframe that, right? So it's a broader conversation than just writing historical. And I don't have this on my question list, but I just love that Tracy brought it up. Wikipedia. How, how does Wikipedia factor into the research you do, or does it? Tracy.
Well, clearly I use it. I don't use it for all my initial research. I do start on the internet, but the internet is very good at giving you sources that you can go to and check primary sources and some things like that. There's a lot of that. More and more there are sites out there that are great for that sort of stuff. Academia.com is a good one where you can get a lot of research papers too. So I start on the internet, but Wikipedia is really good for simple fact checking. If you're looking for an overview, they're not very good. They'll give you a very summarized and general overview, but it might be wrong, so you're better off going with your original sources for that. But yeah, Wikipedia for just dates and stuff like that is really good.
Barb?
I actually agree with that too. Wikipedia is, if you need a really quick check, I do like biological stuff, so if I'm checking a species name or I have some animal or bird, I can take a quick look and not have to go downstairs to my, 35
Your Encyclopedia
bird
Britannica.
books. And So it's a lot easier. And a lot of the information for some of the stuff that I do is a little bit more update than the books that I have downstairs. So I like it, and I like that many Wikipedia articles have their primary source. So you can check those footnotes, and I find those are really good places to go. And they'll send you to directly to scientific abstracts. And so I use it, especially for those quick and dirty facts. Yeah.
I use it as an encyclopedia simply because oftentimes when I'm Google searching, it's the first thing that comes up. Wikipedia is really good about that.
Yeah.
So in terms of that aspect of it, definitely. I'm more of a hands-on researcher, though. I use the internet sparingly as much as possible. I mean, I use it, and I do find certain things that are related to the subject matter that I'm writing about, but I tend to seek out real sources and information that I can use because I want authentic.
Yeah,
So.
of course. Michael.
Like the others,
Yeah.
I tend to go to the bibliography and the citations in the articles that I read. I also do that with paper books. When I'm doing that overview that I mentioned, I'll usually be reading books that are general histories, mostly secondary sources, and often textbooks, but they all have bibliographies anyway. And so I will go through the bibliographies and look for books that match the focused research doing later on to build a list of resources that I can get into when I get to the point of doing very specific research. In some cases, it's damn difficult. One of the projects I've just finished is a murder mystery set in Sengoku Jidai, Japan, early 16th century. There's very little information about that, even in academia, in either English or Japanese.
And you won't be going there. You won't be going there to research that.
Well, actually, as a matter of fact, I am going there next month.
Yeah.
No, sorry, November.
Yeah. Not
Well,
the 16th century.
There's some
Unless
pretty
you
old
have
stuff.
a time machine you haven't told anyone else about. Huh? Yeah. I wanted to just point out, too, sometimes you can find condensed sources that are for writers. For example, Writer's Digest is a whole line. I love the idea, like Joe's idea. When you can, go and see it for yourself, try it out, touch it, feel it, smell it, whatever. But sometimes you can't. You don't want to murder somebody. I mean, you want to, but you're not going to. You aren't going to know what it's like to hit someone with a potato in a sock. Does that think? That's a very popular thing. I mean, I haven't done it. I'm not saying you should do it. But Writer's Digest, for example, has a whole line of writers' resources about injuries,
everyday
about...
life in Victorian England, everyday life in Elizabethan
They
England.
do cost money, but you can usually find them at the library as well. So that's a great resource.
I actually did go to Paris to research this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Lucky
I-
you.
I built a list of surviving 17th century buildings in Paris, and then I was going over there with some friends anyway to tour First World War battlefields, different story. And I spent 10 days in Paris visiting all of these buildings just to get a feel for it. And in some cases to drink, because there was one 17th century stable that had been turned into a bar. And that was an interesting research experience.
Yes, and you can write it all off.
That I did.
Yeah. That's another important part about research.
The taxpayers
As a
in
writer.
Canada wanted me to drink at that bar.
Yeah.
Tax deductible.
Barb, you had something you want to say?
I do. Oh, yeah. Talking about going to libraries, as a former librarian, and I did all my Celtic research with paper, books, and different kinds of things, and I discovered that books in libraries in particular are generally, and especially in science, out of date. So I would use that as my foundation, and then I discovered there are things like science news feeds and reading science news as to what's up, and finding the people that are working in that field and actually contacting those academics personally through email or even paper letters. And I discovered that they are so thrilled that a writer would call them or text them or email them to ask them a particular question or two about their field, and you will get reams of material, more than you ever wanted. Please don't put it in the book, but but it's so exciting for them. So using other people who are experts in the field that you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really important.
With the caveat of like being professional and polite.
Oh,
and
yeah.
if they say they don't have time, you know, you can always say, thank you very much. Could you refer a colleague?
So
There's always a way to get to someone.
I have a story along those lines.
Excellent.
So for my book, it's a crime thriller, and it's about an LAPD detective. And so I read this book called True Crimes of the LAPD, and it was very, very detailed, and it was true. It was a true story book. And so I contacted the publishing company of the book, and they gave me the author's information, his email, and I emailed him, and he gave me the information of the detective that he interviewed for this, and I contacted that guy and sat down with him, and that's the kind of in-person research that I like to do. I found that invaluable because he corrected a lot of little nuancing things that you'd think would not matter, but really do when you're trying to authenticate something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something that I did.
I'm lucky in that respect. My brother is a retired homicide detective, so
Oh.
I have.
Does
an
he have a
in-house-
card? Can you pass that out? Or
I'll double check with him. Been happy to answer questions from me, but I haven't asked him for a while yet. So
yeah. So actually, that speaks, Joe. My question was going to be, what are some favorite sources of research that you like to use? So I guess your answer would be in-person experiences.
And so in Los Angeles, they're very open. Because they deal a lot with Hollywood people, so they're very open about just letting you share opportunity to sit there. Like I went on a ride along, which didn't really actually give me all that much information. The more information I got was actually sitting there in the precinct, observing what was going on. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to observe, because where you find your research may not be looking at exactly the fact that you're looking for, but you may see something in the peripheral that may actually engage what you're trying to say better.
Yeah.
And so I'm a people watcher. And so I always look for that, and that it helps enhance your writing as well. Your adjectives and your adverbs and your action words, that all helps you kind of develop that and give you a style.
Yeah, great. I know, Tracy, you just whispered something to
Yeah,
me, so why
yeah,
don't you
I
share
did.
that?
One of my favorite, because sorry, let me back up and start over again. I write spy thrillers under another pen name, and because of that genre, it's very difficult to find people sources because it is a secretive profession. Nobody's talking about it. So one of my favorite sources for that genre is RSS feeds for news feeds and for experts and their blogs and things like that. There's political feeds, there's cultural feeds, there's all sorts of things out there. There's even some intelligence feeds that you can get. But depending on what it is you're researching, there's probably a blog or a news feed out there that can keep you up to date and very, very current.
That's a great tip. Michael, what's your favorite?
Oh, God,
resource?
My favorite resource is the Toronto Public Library.
Ah.
They have a separate in downtown Toronto that maintains a huge collection of books that can't be taken out. Usually it's the only copy of that book in the system. And a lot of these are quasi-academic or very serious historical or sociological texts. And yes, a lot of them are out of date, but when you're talking in Pan or the sort of cultural tenets of Hinduism, you don't necessarily need cutting-edge research. So TPL also has a facility that allows interlibrary loan, but within the system. So you can request a book that's held at any branch in TPL's system, and it will be delivered to your neighborhood branch for you to pick up and take home. So when I'm doing, again, usually it's the general research part of the subject, I'll have 7 or 8 books on hold from TPL and get them all at about the same time. and take copious notes from them before I have to take them
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that being on the ground in terms of research can also lead to unexpected felicities. I was researching a U.S. Civil War book currently in New York somewhere, and some friends and I went to Gettysburg, amongst other battlefields. But Gettysburg is the one where this happened. We were standing in the Union positions on Cemetery Ridge and looking at the woods from which the Confederates launched their assault, the so-called Pickett's Charge. And we're all sort of scratching our heads saying, what the hell were they thinking? How could they possibly have thought that this would work? Then we crossed the battlefield and went to the Confederate positions, and the appearance was completely different. You know, you're looking up a slope, so it's foreshortened, and we were all like, oh, this is totally doable.
Yeah.
And that's not an understand had been on the ground. You know, same thing in Paris with this. Just walking the streets. Some of them have changed. The basic footprint of the post-medieval city is still there if you look for it. So you can of what it's like be on foot for the character. And maybe that doesn't actually end up on the page, but it's in here, and so it does inform the way you write a character.
Yeah. If I could return just to the library comment. So in Alberta, for example, you can get on the, it's the TAL again. Thank you. You told me last time as well, didn't you? So it's like interlibrary loan, and you can request a library book that's anywhere, and it will come to you. And your library card with Edmonton Public Library or Calgary Public Library, I think, is good. That's your bond that you will return that book. So wherever you live, whatever state or province, you could check that out. Your librarians are they're so happy to help. They really are, and they're a great resource because we may not know what we need to know, and they may have, oftentimes they're trained, right, in research. They may have the masters in information systems and whatnot, and they can help us figure out what to do and where to go. So just a comment about that.
Well, when I worked as a librarian for the province of Alberta, every department has a research library that is specifically in use for the staff. So if you have staff in Fish and Wildlife, there's actually a Fish and Wildlife Environment library. There's the Alberta Law Library, and almost every department has some sort of a resource. I used to work at Edmonton Transit, and they had a library. And don't know if they still do, but if you wanted to know about, the history of transportation in the city of Edmonton or the city of Calgary, you go to those places, and there's always that little library collection. Maybe, somebody's retired and they're just looking after it because they like the pamphlets and things. So yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff there.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add? No. Okay.
Canadian Broadcasting Corporation used to have a great library like that as well, for use by their internal production design people back when the CBC was actually doing television production in-house. And I would occasionally go up there just to snorkel through it because it was a completely bizarre and esoteric collection, sort of like, something collected by an Edwardian gentleman. And you never knew when you weren't going to find something or were going to find something incredibly wonderful.
Yeah. So again, related to libraries would be archives, right? Provincial archives, municipal archives. And there is a way to go to them and a way that you can look through archives. So if you've never done it before, I've never done it before, but I have so many friends who have. Ask the friends that you know who have done archival work to find out what the procedure is, whom to contact, when are the best hours, and just take advantage of your friends and see if they have contacts for you. That's another way to do something in person with a relationship. So related to favorite, of course, is worst. What's a research resource that you really don't care for and you would actually tell people maybe avoid that one?
Newspapers. Most news magazines.
Fox News.
Yeah, goes without saying.
Yeah, the statistics for television news is the statistics for the truth and television news is pretty low no matter which network you go to. Some are maybe close to 20%, somewhere less. But so you might get an idea there, but you always need to really find some second sources and be careful. My favorite source is the Beaverton. Americans, that's kind of like the Canadian Onion. So I'm just joking.
You know,
Thanks
there
for
actually
that
is a
caveat.
town in Ontario called Beaverton.
Yes,
I wonder if
did.
they get a lot of jokes about that.
Yeah.
So
Tracy, you had an evil smile. What can you share?
Well, I'm going to be really contrary. Because I'm doing a book every 4 weeks, I can't. Libraries are my killer. I can't afford, or in place, I can't afford to dash off to Paris
Yes.
and research the scene and things like that, because I have such a tight schedule as far as books are concerned. So anything that's a real time sink, I tend to avoid. I'm very, very efficient with my research. And I've learned to realize to be aware of when I'm going down the rabbit hole and pull myself back.
And how do you do that?
Mostly I start writing. As soon as I realize I'm spending way too much, as soon as I start getting the little energy kick and realize that I'm having so much fun, that's usually a warning sign that I have disappeared down the rabbit hole. And that's when I make myself stop and start writing. And then the writing will inform what questions I need to answer after that.
Yeah. Thank you. Michael, is there a worst?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Further to newspapers, I find them very useful within certain restrictions.
Yeah.
I've written a murder mystery set in Hollywood in 1929. It's very useful to go through microfiche of the various Los Angeles papers from that year to find out what people were talking about, to find out how widely perceived the corruption in the LA District Attorney's office was. Pretty wide. And as long as you understand that it is literally the first draft of history, and that you're not going there for deep research, you're going there for something superficial that would inform a character's attitudes, then fine. Even Wikipedia, I mean, everybody dumps on Wikipedia, but it has its uses as long as you understand the restrictions.
Yeah.
I like going to fashion sites on the internet as well, because as long as
Absolutely.
I can check their bona fides, they can be very helpful.
Yeah, Pinterest, especially for fashion.
Yeah. So there's nothing bad as long as you go in with your eyes open.
Thank you.
And as far as like doing it in person goes, YouTube is obviously a resource you can use, but you could get really sucked into a rabbit hole there because people don't edit very well on YouTube. But Vimeo has travel blogs, and they have a whole group of people that all they do is take video of where they're at. They don't narrate it. They don't do anything. It's just them just panning a camera across a architectural structure or a big field, and they do it all over the world.
bicycle trails.
Exactly.
Actually, I really like Google Maps for that too,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
can get down in the street and have a look around, or down in the countryside and have a look around.
Yeah, the only thing about the Google Maps thing is that it might be outdated, and if you're trying to do something that has a specific date to it, you might want to
Yeah.
verify that. But otherwise, Vimeo, that they do them on a daily basis there. So that's a really if you're looking to kind of experience something, that's one place I would go.
Okay. So
Vimeo.
Vimeo.com. Vimeo. It's like video with an M. So I'm gonna one more question before we get everyone's like rabid questions from the audience, which is, do you have any tools that you like for keeping your research organized, or do you keep your research organized? I think that's fair to ask. Michael, you were nodding quite emphatically.
Yeah, I do. When I'm starting out, I use Google Docs, and I use the heading styles because it builds an outline for me as I write. And I put my notes into the Google Doc while I'm developing the project. So at that point, I'm starting to work out characters. I've got my timeline more or less, and I've done my basic research. I put that into a Google Doc. When I actually start working on the project, I use Scrivener, which is essentially a tool for writing novels, and it allows you to keep all of your information in one folder accessible through a single app. So all of my character sketches go into separate files within the Scrivener project. All of my location notes, again, each location gets a separate file. And then I've got all of my research stuff, and anything that's a heading level piece of text in my Google Doc gets a separate document, again, in Scrivener, so that while I'm working on the novel, if I get to a point in an individual scene where I need a piece of information, I can just pop into that relevant document without leaving the app, and it's all there.
Yeah, great. Joe?
I too use Scrivener a lot for that. They have a notes section, and I like to keep all my notes in there. But I also, because I am interviewing people and talking to the person, I have those recordings, and I have video of some of those things, and I keep that in my Google Drive. It's just easy, upload it. I personally I pay for the bigger file because I do a lot of video stuff, but you can get that for free. It's 2 megabytes, and you have to move stuff around sometimes, but it's easy, it's accessible, and I can do it from anywhere because I have a Pixel phone, so I can literally pull it up on my Pixel phone right now.
Okay, great. Barb? Do you have a favorite tool for keeping your research organized?
I'm old school. I use paper. I actually have 2 things. If I'm working on my computer and I don't use Scrivener, I use Word. And because Word is extremely versatile, and I have folders, and I kind of do what Michael was talking about, but they're all folders. If I'm working on short stories, they're in folders under the title of the story, and they're by year, so I kind of know. And if I'm working on a longer piece, I've got it under whatever the title of the longer piece, and then I may have character studies or in chapters and locations in their own folders. And in there I could have pictures, I could have links, everything is right there. My current projects I tend to keep right on my desktop so I can do a quick look. And in my old school stuff are the really long, involved details that maybe I'm not working with right away. I actually have binders, like 3-ring binders, and with the little paper tabs, costumes, kings and queens and that, whatever,
Yeah.
And so I have both.
Great. Thank you. Tracy?
Because I hate Scrivener, I use Word and OneNote combined. OneNote is brilliant. It's free. It can take audio notes. You can clip from the web. When you clip an image and the image has got text in it, the text is searchable. You can convert an image to text if there's text in it. You have folders and subfolders, and it does all your source citing for you. When you clip from the web, it will put the web address in for you at the bottom. Because you've got folders, subfolders, and notebooks, and you can create as many notebooks as you want. I have notebooks for all my major research. I have a notebook for each book, and that's how I organize my research. When I clip something from OneNote to Word, it will again link. So I've got linked notes, and I use Word to write in, and I use headings to build a table of contents on the left.
Yeah. So that's OneNote?
OneNote, yes.
OneNote. Is it OneNote.com? Or?
I think if you did OneNote.com, you'd probably get there, yes. Yeah.
We just want to make sure people can find a way to it and check it out.
And the good thing about OneNote is it can be carried on absolutely every device you've got, including your phone, where you can do audio notes, and it synchronizes automatically. You don't have to bother about saving it, just does it for you.
That's wonderful. Okay. We are ready for your rabid questions about research. Yes, sir, in the front.
Tracy did touch on this a bit, but I was going to ask, how do you decide when you've done enough research, and do you have to kind of rein in your perfectionism a little bit?
So I'm just going to repeat the question because maybe not everyone's heard it. The question is sort of two-parter. When do you know you've done enough research, and how do you rein in your perfectionism so that you actually write something? Excellent question. Who would like to go first? Joe.
I think when you find the answer, that's when you stop, because if you don't, you'll drive yourself insane. But which I've done several times. But I think that's when I know. When I know that I have the answer that I'm looking for is when I stop.
I think if you're writing in a series or you're writing about a particular subject, the background research is ongoing. It's endless. You just keep going and going and going all the time. But I plot my novels, and that will tell me exactly what I need to find out. Once I have that answer, I go back to the plot. And more questions will come up as I'm writing. I go off and get the answer. I try not to do it while I'm doing first draft. I'll put X's in and I'll research them later. But once I've got the answer, I stop and go back.
Yeah. Michael or Barb, do you want to add to this?
I usually find out when my beta readers get hold of the book. And, then it comes back with, what is this doing here? Why do I care about this? And they're almost always right, damn it. I live in hope that I will eventually get to the point where I recognize these problems before I hand them off to the beta readers. So that's why, as I said earlier, I've started interrogating myself about the information in any given scene or chapter. Does this matter to this character at this time? Is it relevant to what's happening in the scene? If the answer is not yes, 1,000 times yes, then out it goes. I would much rather have an editor come back to me and say, you haven't given me enough background, and put stuff back in, I know it, than to have the editor say, this is unusable because it's, you're making me suffer for your hard work doing the research. And that is something that I think one should never do. So always ask yourself, why is this information here?
Yep. All right.
Yeah, I'm with Tracy. I tend to, when I'm actively writing, if I have a question, I will sometimes just write it in the text, like look this up later, or the XXX. I do that a lot. Get caught up in the rabbit hole only when I'm editing, because I'll look for some little detail, and then I'll spend like 3 days, toiling over something that's not that relevant, but finding things. But when I'm actually writing, I'm more just get the writing done.
Yeah. And if I may address one aspect of your question, the word perfectionism, right?
Never gonna happen.
Allow yourself to not be perfect, because it's impossible.
Don't
Even
make
a
the
published
perfect the
book.
enemy of the good.
Even a published book is imperfect. There is no such thing. So
Except
in terms of doing research, you just do it to the point where you think, okay, I'm good. And then you better get your ass in the chair and write, because that's the point. Unless you're a historian, that's fine, right? Then, oh my God, just go for it. Research. But you're a writer.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, is if you're writing fiction, the story is the thing.
Yep.
It's,
Yeah, which 2, and then 3, and then 4. So, yes, you're number 2.
You do your research and you find that the truth is actually contrary to some deeply held modern myth. But it isn't necessarily directly important to your main character, but it is important to the setting. What do you do?
Okay, so the question is, you discover in your research that you've busted a myth. It's not important to your character, but it's important to your setting. What do you do?
Ooh, can I do that one?
Yes, Tracy.
Yeah.
Go.
That's really easy. You have a secondary character for whom it is important, and then you've got the perfect mouthpiece to make sure that the other point of view is there.
Yeah. Great answer.
Yeah, as long as you can make that dialogue something that a character would actually say. In other words, it's the character speaking and not the author through the character.
Okay.
But I agree, I've done that. The alternate Civil War book that I'm flogging right now is set in 1850, because in 1860 there was never a chance the South could win. And so I've actually got a secondary character, describing how this was the time. If we'd waited any longer, we wouldn't have had a chance.
Yeah. great. Thank you. Yes, your question.
Do you ever outsource your research? Get somebody to actually look at for you by somewhere that they see it that they research?
So the question is, do you ever outsource your research?
That takes all the fun out of it.
I agree.
Yeah, no.
I'll come back to you.
No, I don't.
No.
I can't afford it.
Yeah. Michael or
I have
Joe?
actually done it for others, though.
No.
I have provided technical background information for writers who, either can't be arsed to do it or are just too busy. And if it's a subject that I already know well, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I had an author who was writing about the music industry, and I spent 6 years in the music industry, in the behind the scenes area. So I had a lot of information, and he interviewed me for that. So.
Yeah, but then you became the resource. You
Right, yeah, I was the
outsourcing.
yeah.
Yeah. So, your question.
Thanks. This is actually for Tracy. Kind of for yesterday's creative history panel talked about how important it is to get the research right because you can trust your reader. And I know that you're very on that very tight schedule. So has your audience cared if they've caught some mistakes, if they've made mistakes?
So the question to Tracy is, has your audience cared if you've made mistakes? And have you made any mistakes in your work?
It is likely that I've made mistakes, but nobody has called me on it yet. I do try. I stick with the series. I stick with the eras that I know. I also write time travel, which lets me get into an era, have a modern perspective, and get back out again, which is really useful because then I can go off and play in new eras that I don't know terribly well. And if I make a mistake with the history, it can be the viewpoint character that got it wrong, not me. Mm-hmm. But there is a point where no book is perfect. You can't know everything. And what you think you know might be wrong in 5 years' time anyway. Mm-hmm. So there is a point, and because I'm writing genre fiction for the popular markets, there is a point where you just have to cut it off and say, no, this is going to have to be good enough.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all the story is the thing, yeah.
Yep. And one question up here. Oh, one of those, I don't have a question, but I have an answer.
About outsourcing your research. I saw also on your Facebook and social media and asked why you don't know these videos and then you engage just about another book site is Quella, active over there. And that I got to partners on the user. You can ask questions, you will get good and bad answers, and other people will rank how good the answer is. But that takes 2 days to get an answer, and other one is
Okay.
Ask Me Anything's a good site, too.
Yeah. So that was just because I think this is a recording for podcast eventually, possibly, is social media, using social media as a way to find sources and rate them. Barb had a point she wanted to make.
I want to make a point about getting it right. It's extremely important, no matter whether it's current or historical. Somebody out there is going to read your book and know that you are totally out to lunch. And a good example is Ann Marston, who's an Edmonton writer. She has a book out about airplane thriller kind of stuff, but she is a longtime pilot. She has over 10,000 flying hours, and she's reading a book that she absolutely loved. And she got to a part where ice filled up the carburetor on the aircraft, and it started to crash. Only the aircraft was a turbine engine that didn't have a carburetor. And she said the amount of research to fix that would have been so trivial. And that book went flying, just like the airplane wasn't.
So I think the moral of that story might be if a plot point, depends on a fact that you had to research, you didn't personally know, you should get that one right, for sure.
In the good old days, that's something an editor would have caught.
Yeah.
Because the editor would have asked that. I've been very fortunate, I guess, in the editors I've worked with, because I have occasionally made dumb mistakes. The amount of coffee the characters in this and the follow-up book were drinking in the first drafts turns out to be historically outrageous. But the editor caught that and smacked me around because I kept repeating the mistake.
Yeah.
And so that's not something I will ever do again. And I guess there isn't that much editorial input in this process anymore compared with how it used to be.
Right.
And that sort of means that there's extra responsibility on writers to do the kind of research and vetting of their own work that agents and editors used to do.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a very good street team that do that
Yeah.
too.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I mean, it's a group effort, really, when all said and done. One question, we have time for one more quick question. You're all totally satisfied with our performance up here. I'm so thrilled. I would like to take the remaining minutes and have our panelists tell you what they're flogging here at the convention. Michael, you go first.
Well, okay, I already mentioned this, but A Poison Prayer is on sale at the on-spec table in the dealer's room. The next book, A Tangled Weave, was actually supposed to be out for this conference, but we missed the deadline, and so it'll be out sometime early next year, or possibly late this year, depending on how fast the production goes.
Thank you. Joe.
Well, I have my book, Amongst the Killing, and I'll be doing the autograph sessions tonight at 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
so
I'll be there too.
For that, if you want to buy a book for me, that I have them. I've been carrying them around. Please buy a book for me because my suitcase is heavy. But I have that, and then my sequel will come out in September. I'm doing the pre-launch right now. I'm revealing the cover here in a couple weeks and all that. And goindienow.com. Go check me out. If you're an indie author and you need some publicity, come and see me. I can help you.
Great. Thank you. Barb.
So my historical Celtic trilogy, The Druid Saga, is available at the Edge table here at the convention.
Wonderful. Tracy.
If you go to my website, and you can come and get a card if you want to get there, I have a starter library of 4 novels, commercially released novels, that you can pick up for free.
Great. Will you be at the autograph session tonight? No. So find her in the hallway. Well, thank you so much for coming. And I'm sure if you had some minor question that pops up, if you find one of us wandering the halls, you could probably ask us very nicely, and we'll do our best to help you with any information you're looking for. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.